All right, I think most of the people are in, I think. So again, I want to welcome everyone. Good evening. Thank you for attending tonight's meeting. I am Ron Noda with the City of Los Alamitos. This is our last community meeting for the stakeholders meeting. The first one we had was held on February 17th, with the second one being held on February 22nd. And again, tonight's our third one, the last one. Tonight, city staff, along with Mike Valley from MBC Consulting, will go over some state legislation in regard to organic waste that will affect your trash services. So I want to start off by stating that you probably have seen our outreach flyer that had a graphic with 6 trash carts. I want to assure everyone that this is not the case. We will not be having 6 trash carts in front of your residence. And I'm going to let the rest of the team introduce yourself. And while they introduce themselves, they're going to provide you with some instruction for tonight's meeting. Again, thank you for your attendance tonight. And I'm going to kick it over to Michelle.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our meeting. If you do have any questions while the presentation is underway, you will find at the bottom of your screen, there's a button which says reactions, and you'll find some icons there that allow you to raise your hand. So that'll look like on the left side of my screen. Outside of that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to our consultants, Mike Valley.
Evening, everybody. I'm Mike Ballier, and the city's asked me to go over SB 1383, and I have a brief slideshow to help me do that. And then when we're done, and I'll try to move through as quickly as possible, we can get to your questions. So let me share my screen here. I need to be enabled, and then I will share my screen. Let's try again. There we go. And I will share, and then play from the current slide. All right, hopefully everybody can see my my slide 1. So SB 1383 is short for Senate Bill 1383, and it is basically the most significant solid waste mandate California has adopted in the last 30 years. Its goal is to reduce the amount of organic waste that we send to landfills by 75% in the year 2025. That is about 20 million tons of material that was going into the landfill before that we need to segregate out now. What's really different about SB 1383 is it is a statewide target. It's not a jurisdiction specific program directive. So the legislation is very prescriptive. It puts a lot of requirements on the city, its residents, and its businesses, and there's really not much wiggle room as far as what the city can do. So that means new and additional monitoring programs, enforcement programs, reporting requirements to the state. The city is going to be required to procure recycled organic products at certain specified levels. And we're going to need much stronger contractual commitments with trash haulers giving facility capacity and other duties. So basically this pie chart here shows organic waste, and it's about 2/3 of the waste stream. The state considers green waste, which would be landscape trimmings, wood waste, food waste, and fibers such as paper and cardboard to be organic waste. Food waste is the interesting one. It's about 18% and very close to the largest single item that's currently going in the trash. If you look to the right of my slide, there's definitely an issue with food insecurity in California. And this legislation is actually the first one in the country to attempt to address that. It sets the goal that we need to recover 20% more of currently disposed edible food. Now, while the state doesn't know exactly how much that amount is, they're actually making the city the point person to work and get that expansion in place. This is all being driven by the state's basically Assembly Bill 32, which was the Global Warming Solutions Act. And specific to that, SB 1383 is trying to reduce emissions to 40% of 1990 levels. The reason it involves trash is that methane gas from decomposing organic waste is labeled as a short-term climate pollutant, and the state wants to reduce that material significantly. So again, it helps to know the motivation. And this has been going on for a bit of time. After the Global Warming Solutions Act passed back in 2012, mandatory recycling for businesses, also known as AB 341, came into effect. Then in 2016, AB 1826, which was mandatory organic waste recycling for businesses, came into effect. It phases in over time. Right now, any business with over 2 cubic yards of trash has to recycle their organic waste. And now in 2022, SB 1383 will be bringing food waste recycling to residents. So basically this slide here shows you the important dates. The first one there, 2020, was when the state wanted to reduce the amount of organic waste going to the landfill in half. We didn't make it, which is why all businesses with over 2 cubic yards of solid waste per week are now under the regulations. 2022 is the big date. That's when all of these SB 1383 requirements or regulations take effect. And so all residential properties must have a food waste recycling program at that time. I mentioned the commercial properties with 2 cubic yards or more, they either need a program or a waiver. The city must adopt an edible food donation program and do a lot as far as tracking and publicizing these efforts. We need a paper trail because the state can inspect us at any time. So again, this is another way of looking at the deadlines. 2020, when the regulations take effect, until January 2024, the state is viewing as more of an instructional area. By January 1st of 2024, they will be mandating that the city fine non-compliant entities, and they can begin fining the city. Actually, they can begin fining us in January of 2022, but the state is wanting to educate, inform, and be of assistance over that 2-year period. So the key things that the city is responsible for, as well as the generators, which would be you, the residents and businesses, is to recycle that organic waste. The city needs to provide a program that's currently provided through the existing franchise hauler. It will be a big component in the next hauler selected for the city, which could be the current hauler, but it's a new franchise agreement. That edible food donation program, again, we need to increase edible food donation by 20%, and the law makes this the city actually responsible to promote, establish, and actually financially support some of those efforts if more food is coming in than the city's program can handle. The education and outreach is pretty specific, but it's not just to residences and businesses, it's to educate haulers, facilities, edible food generators that are mandated, like supermarkets will be mandated under this law. And then actually food pantries and stuff like that have to be educated as well, and it falls upon the city. The procurement is basically based on population. The state's going to tell the city how much organic recycled material like compost that needs to be purchased, and the city needs to show it has the ability through capacity planning to handle 15 years worth of its organic waste. So as Ron mentioned, there's not going to be 6 carts, but basically the state is dictating that one of these 3 structures be used. Either 3 containers where you have a gray or black container that is for trash, a green container that is for landscape waste, food waste, and then a blue container, which is for your traditional recyclables. There's also the option of a 2 container system, which is very similar to what the city has now. We're not sure the availability of that, because again, if you look at the middle slide where it says subject to 75% organic content recovery, if you have a two-cart program or you're combining recyclables with trash, overall, your facility that goes to has to recover 75% of the organic content, which may be a tall order for some facilities. So again, 3 container systems are most likely, 2 container possible, 1 container, I'm not aware of one being offered right now. So again, inspection and enforcement. This law actually requires the city to pass ordinances or other enforceable mechanisms that will require the generators of waste to properly segregate their materials so we can reach this goal of recycling 20 million tons of organic material. If the city doesn't monitor and conduct enforcement, then the state will monitor and conduct enforcement upon us. So again, the first couple of years, 2022, 2024, is more monitoring what's going on, educating, trying to get people to have their programs in place. But again, when we get to 2024 on, the mandate's clear. And again, that will be in an ordinance that the city actually has to pass before January 1st of 2022. So again, the city is responsible for many things. It has to arrange for the collection service for all residents and businesses, establish an edible food program, educate everybody in the community how to participate in these programs, procure recycled content material and recycled organic content material, then secure access to facility capacity for the city's organic material and its edible food waste, and then monitor and basically report and do record keeping and be ready for at any time inspection from the state. So again, the new franchise agreement is important in that the hauler that's brought on or retained to help the city really needs to provide some assistance to us in all these areas. This is, as most state laws are nowadays, an unfunded mandate. The city has to figure out how to do all these additional activities and get other people to do additional activities with really no money to do so. So again, the hauler that's brought on needs to be able to provide that service, help promote the various things, definitely take a big hand in education and outreach. This little credit for RNG, that's actually renewable natural gas. I mentioned earlier that the city's going to be under a procurement mandate. Well, if we have our hauler use renewable natural gas in their collection, the city gets credit for that. That will actually save the city some money on procurement. So that's an important component there. So again, I told you I would try to be quick. So it's a lot to get out there, but again, here's kind of a summary page that shows all the new things that are coming for the city to do. You as a resident or you as a business, it's as simple as subscribing to the hauler provided program, following the education that you're provided on what goes in what container, and then life is good. Now, sometimes things are more complicated, so that's why I'm here to answer any questions that you might have. And let me stop share. And here I'm back again. So I can take my glasses off because I don't need them to hear.
Mike, I'm going to start out with 2 questions in the chat box here. I'll start with the first one, and it's,
Okay.
what will the school district be required to do?
School district has to do the same thing, but state and federal entities are actually going to be, their compliance is going to be enforced by the state of California directly. So Cal Recycle, which is the state agency responsible for implementing this law, they will work directly with the school districts. Any public school district is technically a state facility. So the city has to monitor what they're doing, but the city can't make them do something. That then becomes the state's job.
Okay. The second question says, so does this simply mean no green or organic waste in the gray/black or tan containers?
Correct. That is the major contaminant that the state is trying to eliminate. Change the behavior of throwing organic material, your food waste, into the trash, putting it into a separate container.
Okay. The next question says, if this is statewide, won't all haulers change their service to match? Otherwise, they'll be out of business?
They'll have to. Again, the city can't legally hire a hauler who is not providing these programs because the city is under a mandate to provide SB 1383 compliant programs. If the city doesn't, then the state will fine the city until it does. So any hauler that wants to work for a city, especially as a franchised hauler, they've all been at work developing these programs, and so there's quite a few of them that can do it. It's which one can do it the best for the city of Los Alamitos. That's what the city's going to figure out.
Okay. The next comment here says, on a 3 trash container home, the blue container is for recycle, the blue container is for recycle, green container is for green waste, and the gray container is for organic waste.
No, the gray or black container, either color is admissible for trash. The blue container is for dry recyclables, bottles and cans, paper, cardboard. The green container is now for landscape waste, also known as green waste, and food waste. There are some programs that will have a 4th brown container just for food waste, but that's a lot of containers. So likely it will be 3, with the green being green waste and food waste, or 2 with the green still being green waste and food waste. That's the state prescribed colors.
Okay. The next question says, how would this be implemented in apartment row? We currently have 1 large bin behind each building, sometimes 1 bin for 2 buildings.
That's a challenge. And again, there are 2 compliance approaches that the state allows cities to take. A standard compliance approach and a performance-based compliance approach. Under performance-based, 90% of the entities have to subscribe to the program. So that would be 90% of your multifamily properties, 90% of your businesses that are under the mandate at minimum to even do a performance-based program. So again, I recommend a standard compliance program. It increases the ability to grant waivers. Again, the law allows a certain number of space constraint waivers, which is the situation you're mentioning at this apartment complex. There may not be room for a separate container for recycling, a separate container for organics, and a separate container for trash. The only challenge is the city has to use a process. Right now, we've informally granted waivers. By 2022, we will have to have a process where we have a record, a written waiver form, and it has to be defensible. But again, that situation sounds like potentially that would be a space constraint waiver location. So we'll see, but that's the provision within the law to deal with those locations.
Thank you, Mike. We have a couple more questions, so I'm going to keep going down the list here. The next one says, can coffee filters go into the green can when the coffee is being dumped?
Typically, it will be up to the selected hauler to some degree to dictate what their program will accept. For example, if the hauler is going to take the material and compost it, then some organic waste may not be allowed in that container. Coffee would definitely be allowed in that case. Others take the organic waste and whip it into a slurry, pump it into an anaerobic digester. And again, those programs tend to accept a bit more material. It's really going to depend on the hauler selected, but I would imagine coffee would be pretty universal. It would now go in with your green waste, food waste into the green container.
Okay, the next question says, how will the organic waste be packaged? Will we be using plastic bags or something that is biodegradable?
Plastic bags, yes. Biodegradable, possibly. The only challenge with biodegradable or compostable plastic bags is some composting locations do not like them because they do break down, but they take much longer to break down than the other materials that they're composting. Again, the city's going to be selecting the next hauler. Most do allow residents to bag their food waste up and seal it before throwing it in the recycling cart. If it's a food waste cart, if it's a mix of green waste and food waste, you might be able to throw it in loose. I still like bagging it because it controls odors. But that's going to be one of the review factors for the city in which hauler to select is what's going to be the most effective program for residents.
Okay, next question says, so where do we put our steak scraps and turkey carcasses?
That's a very astute point. Again, some organic waste programs will accept meats. Others haven't in the past, and that's going to be an area for the state to basically work on quantifying. Again, the goal is not 100% of the organic waste out of the landfill, it's 75%. So basically the city's responsible for providing an effective program, but if there are materials like steaks and turkey carcasses that your program won't accept, then it'll clearly be, hey, this goes in the trash. And then in that case, that would be permissible organic waste to put in the trash. Again, a lot of it depends on an unknown, which is what are the materials that the new franchise is going to accept as organic waste in that container.
Okay. The next question says, should we expect other cities to have the same policies as Los Alamitos, example, Seal Beach and Long Beach?
Exactly the same. Like I said in the beginning, this is a very prescriptive state mandate. Here is what you're going to do. The only options you really have are 3 container, 2 container, or 1 container. The ultimate goal is the same, 75% reduction. So you'll notice a lot of cities over the course of this year either renegotiating their franchise agreements or going out to bid to add all these new services and requirements to their hauling contracts.
How will additional bins be added to those enclosed trash structures that were built for 2 bins?
That is a challenge for a mature community. Again, there are a certain number of space constraint waivers. Unfortunately, the state will not accept us just saying, hey, all our locations have space constraints. There may be some instances where split bins are used. That is allowable in the regulations. It's the same size bin, but a half of it or a third of it is for one material. The other half or 2/3 is for the other, and it has a split lid that has a little catch on it. There's ways to get creative, and that will be one of the things we'll be looking at with the hauler proposals is, view the city, give us your input, suggest your programs. Again, overall, we need to reduce 75%. So we do have some locations without space constraints, but we need to effectively deal with the ones that do.
Okay. How will this new program affect our rates?
Well, it's an unknown. I do know what other rates in the county are that are renegotiating and actively renegotiating. I think Newport Beach just negotiated a rate increase to about $22.69. I think they were at $15.22 a household prior to that. It's typically going to be up to the competitive process. Really, Los Alamitos is in the best situation because your current agreement expires the day before all these new regulations start. So you will get the final and best pricing that's out there because you're doing that transition at a good time. But again, it is adding additional material. It's adding a lot of new monitoring and reporting and waste sorting to see if you're meeting the contamination reduction goals. So it will not be an RFP that results in a lower price, but how much more the market will tell.
Okay. Will the hauler still separate the trash from one bin? I thought I saw that as an option. Might be tough for tenants of an apartment building to carry multiple bags out of the back of the building or even to have multiple trash cans in their small units with limited space.
All good points. Again, I think it likely that a 2-container system may be an available option. The organics would be kept separate, but the recyclables and the trash would go in a separate container for sorting. The challenge is there's really no single container program in Orange County right now. So there's nothing where the organics, the recycling, the trash is all going on in one container. It's doubtful that will be an option. A 2-container might be, which would help. And then again, waivers are possible, although they have to be defensible. The state has to sign off. But if there are space concerns, the options would be to try to do maybe a 2-container program in those locations or potentially a waiver. It's going to be a case-by-case basis.
There's no speaker, so I'm just going to go ahead and keep going down the questions here in the chat box. Does glass or plastic being put into the blue bin have to be completely cleaned from organic waste? Do labels need to be removed?
No. Typically, the rule of thumb in the industry is if you can get it 90% there, they'll take it from there. I think that was a slogan a hauler, I think it was Waste Management used. So you don't have to completely clean your recyclables. Of course, that's always appreciated by those facilities, but again, removing labels on glass bottles isn't necessary. Ideally, pour out the contents, but again, if it's a glass jar with something in it that doesn't easily come out, if you can get 80%, 90% of the material out, that's the reasonable expectation.
Who is responsible for maintaining bins?
Well, that's typically something that's worked into your contract agreement. A lot of these carts and bins have a long life. So again, repairing or replacing, typically for residential carts, they're replaced if a lid breaks, if a wheel breaks, the hauler's responsible to replace that bin for you. For commercial bins, the big metal ones, typically those need to be kept in as new condition per agreement terms and replaced if there's graffiti issues or if something's broken on that container. Again, that's the hauler responsibility. What the city will be looking at under this agreement is a certain amount of change outs and cleanings of commercial bins. For example, if they're putting food waste in a container, even though it's bagged, perhaps we need cleaning of that bin or a switch out of that bin every year. So again, all those measures are typically the hauler's responsibility. The frequency is typically a franchise agreement term or requirement therein.
How do we apply for the waiver?
Well, that is going to be a process. Oh, wow, my screen just had something pop up on it. Am I still here?
We can still see you.
Okay, just got confusing. Well, that's going to be part of the outreach that the city needs to do heading into 2022. There is a draft waiver form, so we're trying to finalize the form that will be used. It's basically a request. There's some information that needs to be provided, and then that will be reviewed to see if the location qualifies. Again, the two types of waivers, one is called the de minimis waiver. That means, hey, I hardly generate any organic waste at all. I need to be exempt. That threshold level is 20 gallons. If you generate 21 gallons of organic waste per week, you have to have a program. If you generate less, then you can get a de minimis waiver, and then the space constraints. And again, that's where we actually need the haulers to help us identify those locations. But again, we need to get those waivers out, and that's part of the education outreach. Those waiver forms need to get out to people. Also forms if you have your own program where you're recycling your organic waste yourself or your traditional recyclables. We need to have a form for that, so you're not required to subscribe and pay for a hauler program if you have an internal or third-party program that meets the requirements. So there's a couple forms, again, the city has to create, has to monitor, and has to record keep and provide to the state during at any time inspections.
Okay, next question. If each family does its own compost, will it still release methane gas?
Well, yes, that's one of the challenges I think some folks have with the regulations. Composting done outside is basically turning and allowing the material to decompose, and the methane gas is released to some extent. Same thing happens when you put the material in the landfill. And again, some landfills, including Orange counties, have very expensive methane recovery systems that now the state's saying that's not sufficient. So backyard composting is still a permitted activity. There's nothing against it, but it's not something I think the state's promoting as a wide-scale solution. They're trying to get that material processed quickly so it's not emitting methane gas. So typically anaerobic digestion, enclosed composting is what they're going for, but we really don't have enough facilities yet. So the state is giving grants to develop facilities, but we're about 100 facilities shy by the state's own estimate. So that's why it's important for the city to contractually get that capacity for its material, because that's a requirement on us.
Okay. Will the landlord or tenant be fined for non-compliance?
By January 1st of 2024, a fining mechanism has to be in place and used by the city, or the city will be fined. Now, the draft or model ordinance that the state's developed typically has a time frame before you get fined. I mean, you really have to want to get fined to be fined, because you're going to initially be notified of the corrective action you need to take. You're then going to have time to do it. And if you don't do it, then there's typically a second notice that says, hey, if you don't do it by a certain date, then we're going to fine you. And so it can be a 90-day to 6-month process. So nobody's going to be riding down the street issuing fines to people. But there is a process that the state is requiring the city to put in place to fine non-compliant entities. So it's coming, but we have a couple years where it's not mandated. So it has to be on the books in 2022. It doesn't have to be utilized by a city until 2024.
Our last question in the chat box at the moment says, is it too early to ask how dumpsters are going to be monitored?
Well, no, it's a good question. That would be something that, again, the city would want its franchised hauler to help with. Again, they're out collecting those bins. There are route audit requirements in SB 1383 to where basically they need to sample some collection containers. They need to do visual inspections. You'll probably see more usage of red tags. A container will get a notice on it saying, hey, you've thrown a bunch of food in the trash. That's not allowed. We picked it up this time, but we won't next time, things of that nature. Those are all the programs the state is wanting the city to put in place, and in turn, the city really needs the franchise hauler to help do the heavy lifting on that.
We have one follow-up question on the fine, which says, again, who will get the fine, the landlord or the tenant?
It's typically the property owner. So again, I know we had that question come up before. It is going to be a slippery slope, and one that, frankly, we have an upcoming call with the state to try to get some advice on that in the city's ordinance. But the city's ordinance is going to be basically the enforceable mechanism for that. So it's going to clarify who's responsible for what. Throughout SB 1383 regulations, they do refer to the business owner. And again, the state views multifamily commercial properties, 5 units or more, as a business. So in that instance, those 5 unit or more properties, it would likely be the property owner that would be financially responsible. 4 units or less, the state views that as a residential property. It would likely be the tenant of that unit that would be fined. But again, we're trying to verify all of that with the state before the city passes its ordinance. But ultimately, that information will be under monitoring, reporting, and enforcement changes to the city code that the state is requiring us to pass.
Next question says, what is the time frame for the city to have a new refuse hauler under contract?
Well, it has to be by January 1st, 2022, because the contract expires on December 31st, 2021. So there's going to be a request for proposals process later this year. The haulers are going to respond with their proposals. There will be a review and a recommendation process that then goes before City Council, and then City Council would approve, hopefully, the selection, or somebody would be selected, hopefully around August, September timeframe, maybe as late as October. But again, it may be a new service provider. Republic Services may not be the firm selected. If that's the case, then all of their containers would have to be transitioned out of the city, and a new hauler's containers transitioned in such a way that there could be a seamless transition of service on or about the first of the year.
We don't seem to have any more questions in the chat at the moment. Do we have any more questions? Maybe in the chat, any speakers that want to come forward? We can unmute you and give you the opportunity to speak if you'd like. No questions? Okay. Then, oh no. Okay,
Questions? Last call for questions? No? All right, well, I want to thank Mike for all the knowledge that he and doing the presentation. Thank you, Michelle, for manning the chat board. Again, if you think of a question, please feel free to contact the City of Los Alamitos. Again, I want to add that we're doing this outreach pretty far in advance. So along the way, like Mike mentioned several times, the city is going through a waste hauler process right now to go out to bid and again to choose a new waste hauler. So along that route from here to the end of 2021, the city will do our very, very best to provide outreach in terms of organic recycling, in terms of announcing who the new waste hauler is, and announcing a lot of different, things coming about that if a new waste hauler is selected, or even if the current one is going to get renewed. But a lot of things will be, again, outreach to the community as best as we can. So again, if you think of a question that you can't think of right now, please feel free to reach out to the city. Michelle has put her email address in the chat board. So again, feel free to reach out to her. And again, I thank everyone for joining us tonight, and I wish everyone a happy week and enjoy the rest of your evening. Again, thank you.
thank you, everyone.
Good night.